Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Is weeping when reciting Quran an action that is easily attained? Is weeping when reciting the Quran an action that is easily attained? Before I say anything about this, I found the most profound instruction or the most profound analysis of how one should be internally and externally with the recitation of the Quran and with listening to the Quran and with studying the Quran to come from the Ihya Ulumuddin of Imam al-Ghazali, Abu Hamid Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Ghazali, al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala. The Ihya is Imam Ghazali's magnum opus. And in this encyclopedic work on Islamic spirituality, he has some of the most profound discussions and analyses of the soul, the nafs, the ruh, the qalb, etc., the aql. And one of those passages that always stands out for me is the instructions of the internal and external interaction with the Quran, the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you have the opportunity to study that or to learn that, and perhaps you can find some beneficial courses, as always, on seekersguidance.org around Imam Ghazali's works. You can register for those courses for free. And you would find tremendous benefit therein, inshallah ta'ala. You would find that there are some practical steps that we can take. There are too many to list here. But the question here specifically is it something easily attained? You want to take into consideration the fact that human beings are different. We've been built differently. We have different personality types, different temperaments, and so forth. Weeping comes easily to some and it comes less easy to others. And some people claim that they're just unable to cry regardless of whether it's a sad situation or a happy situation. So people are different in this respect. And where there's a genuine physical difference, those differences are taken into consideration by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala no matter what. To prove this, the Prophet ﷺ would often advise that we should cry before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but that if you cannot cry, then you should take the form of somebody who cries. And he would only say this, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, out of consideration of the fact that we are all different and we cannot easily or necessarily easily get into a state of weeping. And while this is something desirable, it should always be for the sake of Allah. I find that many people, unfortunately, when we get into spirituality or Islamic spirituality or tasawwuf or tazkiyah, that we pursue the feelings and the emotions. And while there's benefit to having and experiencing those feelings and emotions, it is critical for us to remember that we are not worshippers of feelings or worshippers of emotions. We are worshippers of only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whether a pious worshipper feels these emotions, crying, weeping, sadness, deep reflection, just being moved in an emotional way or not, such an individual would still continue their worship. So those are some sort of precursors to the question itself. So the question, as you can see, is nuanced. And I would say that it's not something that's necessarily easily attainable, as in you can just do this overnight. But with the right approach to understanding the Quran, studying the Quran, dedicating oneself to the Quran, and working on one's relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When I say that, I mean ridding oneself of sins and doing the bare minimum of what Allah ta'ala requires of us, and then living a righteous life to the best of our ability. When you find that you have the right balance or mix of these, then you would find yourself more prone, I would say, to weeping at the recitation of the Quran. Is it only a matter of understanding the Quran that would lead one to weep in prayer or in recitation? No, I don't believe that is the case. To prove that, many people around the world understand Arabic. And I'm sure if you were to do a survey and ask, do you find it easy to cry or to weep when you recite the Quran, you would find many people would say no. So understanding alone is not sufficient. But understanding with righteousness, again, what I said earlier on in terms of staying away from haram and doing what is fard, and with the right khushu', the right humble submission, it's not impossible for anyone to attain. When you are in the right state, when you have the right relationship, or your relationship with Allah is right, it's actually easy to attain. But getting to that point isn't necessarily easy. So that's the one, the usual way of going about this discussion. Then there are the exceptions to this general rule. And the exception is that often we find people in their darkest states, their darkest times, the weakest point, rock bottom, as we often refer to it as, they can open up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the floodgates open and the tears come because they are in such a state of desperation. And they don't necessarily have all of the above mentioned factors. Perhaps the relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is terrible at that time. And I believe that this too is significant. So inevitably the question has a very nuanced approach here, but I believe that would essentially cover the various aspects of the question, inshallah. But as I said in the beginning, if you haven't already done so, make a note of Ihya Ulumuddin by Imam al-Ghazali and find a teacher, find an opportunity, register on seekersguidance.org to study this amazing book and come to learn not only the etiquettes of the Quran, but the internal and external states that we should strive for when reading the Quran. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best.
La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah.